My name is Dan Sanjoy. I'm a senior analyst with Omdia. So over the last decade, we've seen a lot of improvement in terms of broadband connectivity. And obviously, that's a key driver in terms of driving the digital innovation, particularly within the young or the youthful population. So we're going to look at what we expect over the next 10 years. And I have a panel of key experts within the industry, and I wish to invite them to join me on stage. So to start off the discussion, I wish to give each one of you a minute or two to just say a brief introduction. And while you do that, I wish to get your opinion in terms of what you think is the pace of digital transformation in Africa. Can start with JP.
So my name's JP van der Merwe. I work for Westgrow, so it's the Western Cape's Trade, Investment and Tourism Promotion Agency. And my role is as Head of Investment Promotion. So in the Western Cape, the tech sector is incredibly important to the province. You've obviously heard from one of the officials from the Western Cape Department of Education, and that is definitely one of those sectors which interlinks very closely with one another. So in terms of innovation and digital transformation, my perspective will be more on the Western Cape and South Africa, but obviously some of these trends are broader than that on the continent. So we are definitely witnessing a continued acceleration of the digital transformation in our region and across South Africa. And it's great to see that so many African solutions are driving this digital transformation. And they're doing it in different ways. They're helping people communicate more, access information, transact within and across borders, decarbonize their operations, access financial services, and also trade across borders. This is obviously being achieved in different ways through new hardware and software, the proliferation of smartphones, and that kind of technology. And we see this, as I say, being driven by many different companies in an African context across different sectors of the tech ecosystem. So in fintech, edtech, as we've just heard a little bit more about the education sector, green technologies, and then numerous other subsectors. So I know there's lots of challenges to sort out, but I think we're positive about the future. Africa's providing solutions for the future, and the digital transformation is hopefully going to leapfrog our country, but this region further forward and into a positive trajectory.
Thank you. Lavina?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lavina, more fondly known as the AI mom. And I'm actually wearing two hats at the conference today, one being the co-founder and chairperson of the FinTech Association of South Africa. We newly launched, as in 4 months old, and the other hat is as an advisor to the African Union. And to address your question, in terms of digitization and the pace of it, I think we've definitely seen quite an uptake. And I think for the last probably 5 years, Africa is literally seen as a testing ground for a lot of how this digitization would actually be localized. We know that we sit with over 2,000 languages, for example, across the continent. And I think it's given us quite a nice sort of playground in terms of trialing and testing what would work and what wouldn't work. And I would probably just say, going forward, Africa is probably not going to wait for anyone.
And in terms of uptick, what is driving uptick of digital solutions in Africa, really? What are the key drivers for for the uptick of digital services in Africa?
Yeah, I think one is out of an absolute need. Africa is known for innovation from that perspective. Also from a perspective of this is a new technology, we want to understand it. So that's another area. And I think, we just, at the end of the day, we find ourselves where we just want to uplift the environment that we're in. And I think, that probably sets us a little bit apart from the rest of the globe.
Thank you. JP, I know you work a lot with the green economy. What would you say is driving the uptick of digital solutions in that particular sector?
Yeah, so again, I guess my lens is on a South African and a Western Cape focus, but this is also occurring across the continent. This need for the world to decarbonize is leading very interesting and innovative changes to various parts of what we do in various parts of the economy. In fact, it's going to affect probably every part of the economy, particularly if you're trading across borders and exporting into Europe, or dealing with American businesses or Canadian businesses, or even those in other parts of the world, in Asia and South America. So we're seeing a lot of very interesting companies based here in Africa coming up with very innovative solutions to address those needs. So, for example, the improvement of waste and water treatment, we have examples that we come across in our work where they're using filtration services to treat grey water. We have companies looking to green the supply chains of e-commerce and retailers. I drove just on the short drive down here. I saw a couple of the electric vehicles run by Melovans who help deliver last mile services to various providers around South Africa. Then there's companies who are improving the efficiencies of renewable energy projects. And we've had pitching sessions at events similar to this in the last month, where these kinds of technologies are demonstrated. We're seeing more sustainable agriculture and very interesting examples of how this is achieved. And then we're obviously seeing the global trend of decarbonizing the automotive sector. So there's a couple of very interesting projects happening here where our buses, for example, are going to become electric. There's another project where minibus taxis are going to hopefully also be converted into electric vehicles. So these are some of the amazing trends that we see across the green economy because of this necessity to decarbonize the way we do business and to decarbonize our lives in general. And so what I think our role is also just to promote this, and as I say, to try and, I think the word was used in the previous panel about being resilient, and I think resilience and positivity is so important for businesses across the continent because we recognize our challenges, but we must plot a path forward, and we must look to the future and a positive future for us all. So the last point I would add is that we welcome this innovation. The Western Cape welcomes this innovation, and hopefully more and more companies will recognize these opportunities and find commercial success and commercial opportunity here and across the continent.
And actually, looking into the future, the next 10 years, what are the key innovation trends that we should expect or we should look forward to? Lavina, maybe we could start with you.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. So, okay, so if we take it by technology streams, right, rather than industry streams, we're going to see a lot more convergence sort of starting to happen. And for example, if we take the likes of artificial intelligence and blockchain, for example, we're going to see a lot more use cases for both of them to kind of coexist. For a long time within the fintech space, we've seen the traditional okay, never mind. We've seen a lot of the technology being applied to fintech in a very traditional manner, right? So that being just in payments and the digitization of that, taking processes and digitizing that. But now we're going to start getting into the interesting space where we're going to do a little bit of the innovation, like, you know, embedded financing and what DeFi has to bring to the party. How does, for example, mobile wallets kind of coexist and work with traditional financing or within the fintech space or even insurtech? So, you know, the kind of convergence between all of those is where the interesting parts lie. And for multi-sector or multi-industry to kind of exist, you kind of need a crossover between the technology streams. So I think, you know, some of those areas are going to be something to look forward to. If we take, for example, the healthcare sector, I think that's going to include a lot more AI and robotics. If we look at climate, I think AI and quantum computing is probably going to play quite a large role in that. So yeah.
And JP, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think Lavina's covered a few of the sectors that we're seeing transformation in already. In the startup world, fintech is attracting, I think, just over 60% of all investment. So that's a big focus, as I mentioned earlier, talking about trading across borders, payments, those kinds of things that Lavina's already talked to. She's also mentioned health tech and the green economy, technology trends. Those are definitely things that we're also witnessing. I think the other point, and building on the previous panel, education technology, while there's obviously huge challenges to overcome, at least we are witnessing some very interesting situations where companies are trying to provide solutions to this. There's obviously companies not just in the technology and innovation in the sense that we talk about it this week, but just providing innovative solutions within an older, physical model. So there's schools targeting kind of lower LSM groups that are springing up all over South Africa to try and target where there may be a lack of formal education, or the government does not be able to provide and build schools quick enough. So even innovation, which is not kind of focused on AI and the 4IR, we're seeing innovation in just tweaking the government model and making it, bringing in the private sector to improve things a little bit. So again, education, there's huge challenges, but I think there's interesting examples being brought up. And for example, there's another event happening in a few weeks here in Cape Town again on Africa EdTech. So I would welcome as many of you to come to those kinds of events as well, and to look at what solutions are being developed by companies around the continent to address the challenges raised on the previous panel.
And in terms of challenges, what do you think is going to probably inhibit the realization of some of these innovations in the future? So what challenges are we likely to face in the next 10 years?
So again, on the previous panel, the broadband penetration, the education system, those kinds of challenges are going to continue to exist. But I think, I talk to a lot of companies. We hear a lot of companies talking, companies from all over the world coming and recognizing opportunity on this continent. The population is going to be doubling in the next 25 years. People recognize Africa as the next place for commercial opportunity. So I think those companies coming here are helping to try and solve some of those infrastructure challenges, to try and step in where governments may not have the financial capability to do it. So there's the infrastructure there's those infrastructure challenges that we have. I think trying to keep up with the acceleration of technology is also difficult. But again, this idea of leapfrogging from where Africa was 20 years ago to where we are now, I think that's a key part of the solution to some of those challenges. And then, of course, we need to, deal with our own industrial challenges. So one of the key things is many countries in Africa haven't industrialized at the same period as other countries in Europe or Asia. And so how do we catch that up without maybe including the same developmental path that other countries have had to go through? So I think those kinds of challenges need to be addressed, but there's many examples of how African countries are leapfrogging that industrial process, or the industrialization process, and really catching up to many countries and providing solutions that those countries don't have. I think we were at an event last night, and it's interesting to hear in Europe and North America how the same fintech applications that we take for granted, like app payments, it just doesn't exist to the same extent. So I think we need to also be proud of the innovation that we develop on the continent, and not just kind of identify the challenges that are unique to Africa. We're solving challenges that other parts of the world don't have, but in that sense, we're actually taking a leap ahead of many of those countries.
Thank you. And Lavina, I know you've done a lot of work in terms of in AI and blockchain, and you're talking about convergence. Do you foresee any particular challenges in that particular vertical?
Yeah. So honestly speaking, I think we've been a rather disjointed, sort of solution orientated, environment, and that's something that really needs to change. In terms of gathering more collaboration, putting a more direct effort. So whether that be from a payments perspective, whether that be from a regulatory perspective, whether that be from a startup support perspective, right? Because we see, for example, within the startup space, as much as there's the funding that comes through and there's some form of innovation that is allowed, we don't have enough of a playground for people to then go ahead and test their actual applications to the cities or to municipalities, to kind of then mass scale it. Because when we talk about innovation, innovation is something that really needs to mass impact. And to your point, in terms of be proud of the things we've done. I mean, we've literally taken mobile wallets and kind of gravitated that from unbanked to people that can digitally now trade. So I think more of those kind of scenarios is what we're after.
And it's nice that you've talked about the regulatory, and I'm quite keen to actually have you talk about the regulatory environment in Africa. Is it conducive in terms of enabling innovation, and and especially looking at the next 10 years?
Yeah, I think we all acknowledge it probably needs to be faster, but I think the key thing is one of the things at least we are noticing is that while there's change in some sectors of government regulation, so for example, the green economy innovation is being driven in South Africa literally in the last year by changes in regulation to allow more independent power to be produced. And that doesn't just allow standard power to be produced, it actually allows companies who service those industries, who innovate to improve renewable energy project efficiencies, for example, to come around, or companies who are dealing biomass to form. So there have been some changes. Obviously, we want things to be faster. I think the only positive, the positive I see out of those challenges is that we see industry coming together, and I think that's very positive. So Lavina's with the FinTech Association of South Africa, and one of the reasons they've come together is that they need to talk with government and they need to address some of these challenges on regulation and to move things faster. And I'll let Lavina talk about the kind of good news that we heard a couple of weeks ago about more acknowledgement for crypto and that kind of things. But I think obviously we want things faster, but I think, again, my message is that we come together as business, as government, and we have those conversations more often, and then hopefully we can move that conversation forward.
Yeah, and I mean, just to piggyback off you in terms of what we've done to date, I think, having a united voice is crucially important. And that's something we've probably lacked for a little while. Some people say it's probably too late, but, in our eyes, it never is. And with that, it is the likes of crypto being, classified as a digital asset by the FSCA, that's within South Africa. That's something that we played an active role in terms of creating, working groups and, pushing, not pushing, but rather bringing together parties on that front. So, I think regulatory in South Africa is positioning themselves as, yes, we're approachable, yes, we're here, yes, we're willing to listen, which is fantastic for any startup. And that is only going to help us to expedite that entire ecosystem. Yeah.
What about in other countries outside South Africa? Is it still the same?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So we have quite a different sort of approach, depends which part of Africa you go to. So for example, we know the north and, the likes of Nigeria, so that whole sector is pretty much active when it comes to regulation. I think they're a lot quicker on the go, and we've seen them being a little bit more proactive. So for example, Nigeria in itself had adopted open banking and open financing probably about 6-7 years ago already. So that allowed for a lot of the growth within the economy of fintech itself to actually happen. When we go to the other parts of it, it's very segmented. So, unfortunately, we kind of deal with this problem where when we deal with the smaller countries, they kind of either get not noticed as well or they don't have a loud enough voice. But there are stuff that's starting to happen. So, for example, we work quite a lot with all the fintech associations across Africa. And for example, Quartervoy is just launching. That's going to happen, I think, in 2 weeks. So, we're starting to see a lot more of that that's actually coming through, and where people actually want to have a voice and they kind of want to have a play in terms of the ecosystem, in terms of the innovation. We've obviously seen, digitization kind of affect us in many different ways. One being digitization has affected our language. Digitization has affected urbanization. Digitization has also gone ahead and affected informal sectors. It's also equally gone and disrupted economies. And I think, we find ourselves in quite a unique place at this point in time, because technology, from an AI perspective, I guess, we're going to see it become a lot more decentralized. And from a blockchain perspective, it's going to start becoming a lot more centralized, and somewhere in between the both, they're going to meet. So, yeah, interesting times.
Yeah, very interesting. At this particular time, I'll pick a few questions from the audience. Is there anyone who has a question? Yeah, we have a couple of questions at the back. So please tell us your name and where the company you come from, and to whom you're directing the question.
Hi, my name is Tony. I'm from Mauritius. So it's a question for the gentleman from Westgrow. Thanks, very nice panel, very nice discussion. Thank you so much. I just want to know, in terms of, we talk about innovation for the next decade, and you're into the trade industry. What are you doing in terms of, circularity, industrial symbiosis, what we talk about? I mean, how far are you regarding this in South Africa? Getting all the different people, industry together, and to see how their waste can become a raw material, or how you can connect everyone with like an AI system. What do you think of that? How do you see this? Thank you.
So yeah, I think in the Western Cape, we're quite blessed that we have an organization called Green Cape. They're one of the partners we work very closely with. They focus on different subsectors of the green economy, with the circular economy being one of them. So they, as an organization, we work with them, but we also don't pretend that we know as much as them. So they have amazing analysts who produce amazing work which understands the circular economy from different perspectives. We connect on the investment and trade side. So as they support the industry, we try and take those companies into the rest of Africa and into the rest of the world to export. We also try and attract investment wherever possible into those subsectors. So there's various bits of work happening, and our role as an organization is to really try and bring different players together. So we work with organizations such as Green Cape, we work with governments, we work with other industry associations to try and host the events or support the events where they're being already led by events organizing companies. So in a lot of these situations, like this gathering right here, we don't need to bring all the players across the continent together on tech, because companies like Inform are doing that for us. So our role, we see, is to support these kinds of events. Obviously, we are also trying to really understand some of those sectors a bit better. So we work with our partners to do that, whether it's the City of Cape Town, Western Cape government, and then bringing them together with private sector to try and understand what the needs are and how we're going to address that. I hope that answers the question.
Hi, my name is Sipho Mbonana. I'm from Beringen, South Africa. Okay, so my question is to each of you individually. Okay, so we're speaking about trends, and I'd like to know are there any investment trends in tech education as a business model, right? Because I'm asking this because if you want to start a wildfire of innovation in Africa, you have to start by educating people, right? And then we know that government is super slow when it comes to that. It then comes into the private sector's responsibility to then train people, educate people because if you train somebody who's super interested into nursing, for example, and you teach them about tech, they could come up with technologies that could save people's lives and so forth. You know, so I'd like to reiterate my question. Are there any investment trends with regards to education on tech? Thank you.
Do you want to take that first?
Sure. So, I mean, as the previous panel were talking about, you know, there are significant challenges in the current education model that we see in South Africa and in many countries across the continent. But I think tech is the one way that we try and, again, leapfrog some of the shortcomings that there may be in the education system. So we have Capacity, who had their CEO sitting here earlier. We have Ingenie, which is another incubator for education technology companies. They're organizing, as it says, an Africa EdTech Week. So there are definitely opportunities in this space to try and bring people out of the current education system or bolster the current education system to prepare them for the world that we currently live in. So it's incredibly important part of what we're talking about as an organization at Westgrow. The provincial government is talking about. We understand the limitations and how far the world has come and how we need to catch up in many ways. So there are many models. Some of them are very innovative. It's an online model. Some of the models, as I say, are less innovative in the sense that they don't necessarily involve tech. It's a new way of building schools. So there are various companies in South Africa that some of you may have come across, like Curo or Spark Schools or Next Generation, who are all developing a new model on the older model of education, but are helping to try and make it easier, more accessible, and step in where the government is not necessarily able to kind of provide schools quick enough or to provide the education that students want. So I think there are plenty of opportunities, and I think we hope that all of the companies who have that as one of their mandates, again, as we heard in the previous panel, develop the channel internally, but also help develop the pipeline. So going into talking to schools, talking to universities, and really explaining to children what is the current world looking like, what is it going to look like in 10 years, and therefore what do they need to do to prepare themselves for this new and evolving world that we live in.
Yeah, I would say one word, which is liquid upskilling, right? That is something that we kind of really need to drive more towards, especially given the fact that we sit with such a young population. I think it's 18.8 years as an average. We have an opportunity to actually, not only tech drive ourselves with the right kind of skills, but, also start from a very young age, I guess. We've seen private and public schools kind of starting to open up themselves to that. Equally so, I think we sit with about 700,000 professionals in computer science, I think it is, particularly across the continent. Half of it only exists in the Big Five. So therein also lies an opportunity for us to kind of, from an investment perspective. So anything that is going to allow us to get hands-on really quickly, really fast is the kind of angle that we need to go to. But I would also say and encourage everyone here, as much as it's about the training, it's also about the thought thereafter. So are we actually within our own organizations creating internship programs to then support these kind of areas that we want to delve into? Are we creating enough apprenticeship programs? Yeah.
Thank you. Can we pick another question at the back?
Yeah.
And then in front.
Hi, Chibuzo Opara, Drugstock, Health Tech out of Nigeria. I'm curious about the conversation that was happening on mobile wallets and the convergence with payment systems. So I want to throw another payment system into the mix, government, digital currencies. And I'm curious about how do you see that? Could you theorize a bit further about how you see that space evolve in the next 2-3 years? What kind of convergence are we looking at? What will be the lowest common denominator? That sort of thing.
Okay, so that's an interesting one. A little bit of a difficult one, but an interesting one. So obviously we have the likes of stablecoins, crypto and CBDCs that are kind of a love-hate relationship with each other, that's kind of trying to figure out where they fit in, who's going to be the more dominant and who's going to be the more trusted, right, within that system. So I think that it's probably going to gravitate a lot more on the CBDC side, where payments will be baselined against some form of that. And that would sort of be across all the different sectors. So whether that's on the fintech side, the agri-tech side, health tech, and the likes of it. When we talk about the emergence of mobile wallets and traditional finance to the likes of, digital finance, I think we don't have a remedy just yet that works well. So that gives us an opportunity to kind of find that balance. But I think it's going to swing a lot more on anything that can allow for that interoperability and that seamlessness to kind of engage from a consumer end. So I, as Lavina, as a digital consumer, how can I navigate the waters to actually get a value-added experience? And I think that's just becoming a lot more sort of a demand from end consumers. And that will kind of dictate a lot of which direction that flows. And yeah.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Sanit. I'm from the Tony Blair Institute. I'm based in Ethiopia. And my question is, well, to both of the speakers. We know that digital is inherently borderless, and at the same time, it kind of feeds off and is driven by other globalization trends, whether that's immigration or kind of greater international investment. And I just wondered, in terms of from an African perspective, what are the critical policy issues that we need to think about to ensure that all African citizens are benefiting from these trends and are actually kind of not having to deal with the kind of more of the negative consequences?
So I would say probably two areas, one being data privacy and digital identity. For me, the way that I see it, it's something that we're going to all use, we're all going to require, and it plays its huge part because it talks about the whole borderless regulations. How do I transact with my data irrespective of where I'm transacting or where I am transacting from? So yeah, I think that's one, and the other is the digital identity. That's an area where it's probably underseen or sort of under the radar for now, but it is something that is of importance because we're attaching everything to that in itself, or to me as a digital citizen, and trust becomes really important in that transaction. Accountability becomes equally important. People also add in the layer of monetization that becomes important when we have to talk about digital identity. So there's a few examples, and I guess, what do we do when, for example, someone has to have a multiple personality disorder? How do you then, have that within the realm of a digital identity, right? For example, on the flip side of that, how do you actually then go ahead and say the trends that you're actually picking up on me is actually where I want to be, right? So a lot of the time we've already been trusted in technology from the likes of, everyone's probably used LinkedIn today, everyone's used Uber here today, or Spotify and the likes of it. So we already inherently, trust a lot in it, but we're also equally allowing it to shape where we go to. And I think that for us is quite a large balance. There was an article written in the MIT around data privacy, and it was a use case from the South African perspective. And that was, a simple thing of capturing a license plates, and that is then attached to your ID number, and your ID number is then shared with other databases. So, that in itself gives quite a leeway in terms of what can go wrong. And, we equally have the opportunity to kind of change that narrative from a very early standpoint.
So I'll probably take this from a broader perspective. I think the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is one of the key policy and regulatory instruments that's going to make digital transformation and hopefully a borderless continent more real. Obviously, we know there's significant challenges. Many countries have already signed up, but the actual implementation of that agreement is still to be rolled out over many years. But I think that is a key policy issue that has been taken by many governments across the continent. And the hope is that, as we've witnessed, for example, in the EU, that can then help drive cooperation, not just economic, but political cooperation, and cooperation in a social manner as well. I think there's also lessons to be learned in terms of the responsibility on governments to make sure that they bring their citizens along, that they understand that we are a world together and it's getting to a smaller place, and that we don't get that kind of pushback against protecting our own, whether that's your own small country or whether it's your racial group or whether it's your cultural group. I think it's key that government really leads that conversation to bring people along, and that we as citizens really push for us to accept our fellow human beings, and to on the African continent to accept our fellow Africans and make sure that we're driving a positive mindset with regards to how that's going to positively impact each person and each country.
Okay, let's take one final question. So, two. We have one at the back and.
Maisha Tukamaru from Benin. So, is not quite a question, I think is a thought, so we'll discuss it. We all agree that internet is not a safe place, with actually a population quite young, as you said, 8.8 average. So think of my young sister having a 8 years old. I believe the first time she'll get contact with internet maybe through Facebook or TikTok, and there is no parent to necessarily monitor to check the content that she consumes. And mostly the content are not decent, I would definitely say. So how government can work together with those companies like TikTok, Facebook, so that the contents are more in promoting all those solutions that we are creating today, and so that those young girl and young boy can get, have, know that yes, we have those solutions that can help me get digital skilled and educated. Thank you.
So I'll probably respond first. I'm a mom of twin girls, so I really relate. You know, we kind of find ourselves in an environment where each person that's within that ecosystem kind of blames each other, right? So one of my projects that I'm hoping to really get off the ground is something similar to what Meta has done. So Meta has what they call an oversight board, which is an ethical board that kind of really filters through a lot of these concerns, right, as a base one, right, sort of solution. But taking that and kind of making that generic to big tech, because I think that that's really important. Having big tech together with the likes of the local, local companies, local startups that also contribute to that, right? But it has to be a combination of technologists together with civil rights, together with human rights, that kind of really need to be on that to kind of navigate some of those questions. That would be one. The other, I think, is there's a lot more education that's actually required, and I don't think it should only fall on parents. So, you know, there is kind of more of a drive that needs to happen, and that's both from a schooling perspective, both from a home perspective, and equally so from a governmental raising awareness perspective.
So yeah, I guess from my perspective, in a broader sense, I think the key overarching aspects are that I think companies really need to take responsibility for educating governments and the populations that use their technology platforms about all the concerns that may happen, that the issues that may play out, and to allay the fears of those organizations. And then from a government and NGO perspective, it's important to kind of ensure we understand what those platforms are, what the issues may be, and to make sure that we raise concerns and that we hold those companies accountable in a responsible way, but we hold them responsible for the platforms that they develop and that allow, you know, many good things and interconnectivity, but also at times when there are negative issues that need to be addressed. So I think just from private and public sector coming together, it's important that they both have an open and honest conversation, and that government hold those companies accountable, but as I say, in a very responsible and sustainable way.
Let's get another question. So we'll have only 2 questions.
Good morning. It's all on, yes, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Faustin M. Ndikumana, founder and CEO of Text Plus Text Publishing. It's a new startup here around the world, based in South Africa, Cape Town, originally from Rwanda, living here in South Africa for a few years. Well, looking at Levina, just quite interesting woman sitting in front of us. Well done. Besides working as a advisor for Africa Union, that's quite interesting. That's why the question comes to you about technology reaching Africa and having every African using these same technologies. How are Africans going to afford this? What are your plans forward to helping everybody being able to access all these technologies? And as a service provider in my industry, digital is quite very important, and that's why I'm still innovating Text Plus Text Publishing, which one of our services, of course, are digital services, e-learning services, which will be offering soon as we launch larger. Recently I heard this man, Elon Musk, talk about universal basic income. And you, in our continent, helping our people coming right and access these technologies. I think Elon Musk was talking about universal basic income, where everybody in the world, someone who can afford what you offer, what I'm offering, will be able to access this income. Do you have anything in place towards such kind of basic needs livelihoods which can access, which can afford all these tools, technology we're offering? Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great question. So there's 2 parts to it. One being we have to put in the frameworks or the guardrails that we actually require to function, right? And that's the likes of regulation, whether that be from an IP perspective, copyright perspective, data, AI, blockchain, the full spectrum of the technological guardrails that's required. In conjunction, we're required to also update a lot of the pre-existing human sort of regulations that have been laid out. In addition to that, it is then the application that you talk about. So how do we then take what has been placed as a guidance and a guardrail and then mass scale that across the continent? The problem, or one of the longest existing problems, is that Africa doesn't see Africa as a complete Africa, right? So we kind of function in our own separate entities. So it makes it a little bit difficult to kind of say, yes, this is the mass sort of idea or vision with it. It is something that we're working on. I probably am not allowed to kind of get into the details of that just yet. But it is there. It is something that has been visible and does require to be changed.
JP, do you have something to contribute?
I mean, I think Lavina's covered it off well. I mean, there's various ways in which, I mean, she can speak from obviously the governmental and the AU perspective. So I think from my more kind of local perspective, I think, there are many solutions being offered, to try and bring people ahead in terms of like making sure that people are removed from a life of poverty. And again, the tech solutions are coming across different sectors to support those people in different ways. There's I believe, some interesting work happening on how The grant provided during COVID is providing an interesting insight into who, in South Africa at least, are the people who really relied on that money. And from what I understand, there's some interesting work that's going to be coming out on how we use that data to identify the needs of those people and address those needs.
Yeah. So we've run out of time, so taking the make it short, please. Can you have a mic? I think the mic is not on.
I think it's not on.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's on.
now it's on. Hi, my name is Fatuma Tisakona Koka, and I'm from Liberia, and I run the White Group Holdings company that we do a lot of digital modernization of payment system and settlement. And I really want to piggyback on her question and comment, which I think is very important, that as we are so anxious to make sure that we do not miss this wave of the fourth industrial revolution, that we don't throw our children under the bus to very preventable situations that we see across the world. And I think one of the major stakeholders that we have to have in this ecosystem would be parents, because we know what is good for our children, and decisions that are being made about the future, we have to be partaking in it. You know, it's not just for the government or private sector or nonprofits, because we know already the detriments that have been caused by these ungoverned technology in our children's hand from other countries and other continents. So I really like to, if it's not already happening, see a lot more of the stakeholders from the parents' community participate in the structuring of policies and different agreements that might be going on that would touch our 80-year-olds and our 2-year-olds and our 5-year-olds. Because at the end of the day, those people will become us. And we want to make sure that we have not devastated them because of our anxiousness to be part of this fourth revolution that is happening and take humanity from them. Because we are different on the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think we will leave it at that. Thank you very much for your contribution. And thank you very much, JP and Lavina, for your time. Thank you.